Good morning, everyone. Andy Olive, the Food Access Program Director at Fresh Approach. We're a Bay Area, primarily nonprofit, working at the intersection of food security, nutrition education, local agriculture, and we'll talk a little bit more about our role in this project as we go along.
And good morning, everyone. I'm Wilken Louie from the California Association of Food Banks. We are a longtime organization fighting food justice, and we really help provide food procurement and advocacy for a large number of food banks within the state.
Yeah, and I'll just start sharing my screen, everybody. Thank you so much again for joining us today. And as Evan already mentioned, we really encourage you to share your thoughts and your questions in the chat and in the Q&A. And yeah, let's get started. I think Evan kind of already spoiled the title of this presentation, a statewide network of farmers fighting food insecurity, farms together. But I'll pass it over to Andy to explain where did this actually start?
Yeah, so this program at a national level is called the Local Food Purchasing Assistance Program. It actually has its origins back in 2020 during COVID. In March, there was an immediate need to feed families who were suddenly sheltered in place and with skyrocketing unemployment. And simultaneously, there was a need to protect our farmers who were also economically impacted through the loss of market. So back then, there were all across the country programs that didn't do anything too innovative in a way. They food hubs and partners bought food from small mission-driven farms, aggregated it, and distributed it through food banks and community partners. But it was new in the sense that in traditional and historical models of hunger relief, there was never enough funding to pay market set prices. And unless that was the case, unless farmers were getting the true cost of, or these kinds of farmers were getting the true cost of their produce, they wouldn't have been able to participate. So the program sunsetted at the end of Trump's first administration, and during Biden's administration, it was brought back and expanded under the moniker LFPA. They made some changes that really protected and invested more heavily in commitment to values-based procurement and to procurement from small farms and socially disadvantaged growers. And then they structured it as what is called a cooperative agreement. And that meant that grants were guaranteed between the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, and every state government. So there was going to be one LFPA in every state around the country, as well as a significant amount of the total budget was portioned to commitments to tribes, to a pretty unprecedented scale, I think, actually. I won't go so into the weeds, but it's important to know there was ultimately around $1 billion around the country allocated into this project. 20% was preserved for tribal commitments who had direct contracts with the USDA. In our state, the state agencies in charge were the Department of Social Services and to some degree, our California Department of Agriculture. And the portion of the funding around the country was
Oh,
allocated by population density. Um, Meaning California, by a pretty significant amount, got the largest pot of funding, close to $80 million. And that's a lot of money for any one organization to figure out what to do. So our three organizations came together to collaborate on the coordination and administration of this pot of funding, really from the upstart having the mission of directing it to as many farms as possible and as many mission-driven small farms, socially disadvantaged growers as possible. Each of our organizations comes in with a unique perspective that added to the whole. So our primary lead is the California Association of Food Banks. who hold the contracts, thankfully hold all of the administrative responsibilities that no one else wants to do in terms of finance and contracting, and that is a degree of headache we could spend a whole other presentation on, as well as they hold the relationships with the food banks, who a lot of the money was allocated towards. CAFF, many of you obviously know who they are because they're here as the leading small farms agency and representative and ally in the state. It was as a no-brainer. And being in the room with that level of expertise. And ourselves, Fresh Approach, though we were in the Bay Area, we in 2020 had that first grant funding and had developed a model of distribution that we thought worked pretty well. And Hector, should I say how it works, or were you going to take that one?
I'll actually pass it over to Wilken to explain a little bit how the program works and how the money flows through it.
Yeah, thank you guys. So even though the announcement was made in early 2020 or so, the money really didn't flow out for us into 2024. However, that gap in time gave us a chance to really think about how we were going to put together a program that worked, working out kinks, coming up with fair pricing models, and we really settled on two different models for the program. One was a mixed box program through aggregation, and another one was bulk purchasing, with still the concentration going to small farms. So the funds really flow through two California state agencies. The California Department of Social Services got a huge chunk of the allocation, and the allocation one here was really centered around individual budgets set for 34 or so food banks using their USDA studies on hunger needs, etc. But a small portion, I shouldn't say small, but it's small compared to the 64 million, 14.1 million filtered through CDSS and then to the California Department of Food of Ag. This pot was made available at the start of 2024, and this allowed us to initially test out our models. We ran what we called a test program looking at both a box and bulk program and geographically through three areas, the Humboldt area, the Central Coast, and down south, where we could test the aggregation model, the flow of product, the invoicing, etc. Eventually, as we got comfortable with the models here, we rolled this out more to our community-based organizations. At the end of, or actually in the fall, around August and September of 2024 is when the big pot of money, the CDSS funds kicked in, and we were able then to roll this out with aggregator food bank partnerships.
And I guess oh my God, what is happening? Okay. Sorry, guys. It's a miracle that I was able to work in this program because my multitasking skills are not great. But anyway, I guess one of the questions is, does it work? And at the federal level, of all the almost $1 billion that were dedicated to this program, somewhere around 600 million to 700 million was dedicated specifically to the purchase of vendors. Now, there was a calculation that was made by the Wallace Center. This is a federal level, by the way, about what is the actual economic impact. And that for every dollar spent on LFPA, specifically on the vendors, around $2 went back to the community. That number holds for California. So we know that if we look at the high level metrics, that it worked. And let's look a little bit at a historical context. And I know I'm burying the lead, right? But 89% of all the farms that we have in the country are small, and they account for less than 20% of the total market value. So that means that even though most farms are small, they really don't have a huge market share. Most farmers, about 71%, have second jobs, right? And 1 in 5 Californians struggle with food insecurity. That's even higher for families, by the way. So, and apart from that, 87% of food deserts are in rural areas. So, and I know I'm throwing all the data that's already in the slides. What is this guy doing? Just reading. But the important piece that we can see here is that what we can get from this data is that most farmers and farm workers often can't afford the food that they grow. And that's just an insane result, right? That's an insane metric to say. So what about LFPA? So we know that most farms and most are in rural desert, right? In rural, right? Not rural desert, sorry, food insecure areas or live through food insecurity. What can we learn? Well, we had this massive impact where we saw that about over 800 farms participated with 40 aggregators. We worked around 53 counties. Over 70% of the people that participated in this program identified as disadvantaged. And for the purposes of this program, we meant LGBTQ plus, BIPOC, women-owned, or veteran-owned farms. So most of those people were actually the participants of this program. And with over 40 food banks participating here and close to $60 million to this date worth of sales, a little bit higher now at the time of making the presentation, right? That means that at its peak, we were moving over $500,000 worth of food going to food insecure communities, oftentimes the same communities that grow the food. And that means that over 21 million pounds of food were moving or are moving through the system, have moved. That's an insane metric, right? So we know that this program is having the right type of impact. Not only that, well, if you saw the slide, that we mentioned that there was a bit of a freeze in the slides, right? There was supposed to be another extension to this program that took the program to 2028 that added a significant portion of funding to continue this program going. Now, unfortunately, March of last year, there was 28th of March. I still remember it was a Friday at 5 p.m. I got the notice that this program got frozen by the administration, right? So something that we learned, and Andy will talk a little bit more about this piece, is that this amazing network of food banks, of aggregators and farmers also was a vehicle to impact or to affect change, right? So let's take the funding freeze, for example. The freeze stopped all LFPA across the entire country for 1 week. Why was that 1 week? Because LFPA participants across the nation, including Farms Together, started calling the representatives. And it had this massive impact that just 1 week later brought the program back, right? And that's insane because at that time, we started seeing that a lot of other programs starting disappearing and some of them never got their funding back. So when a lot of other programs got canceled, LFPA got back. Yes, with a massive haircut that unfortunately means that this program is going to end this summer, but still, it meant that lifeline for aggregators and farmers was back. And that's one of the many impacts that we didn't know this program could have. And I'll pass it over to Wilken to talk about a little bit more on the food bank side, because they also had amazing impacts.
Yeah, so one of the things I was fortunate in my career is prior to joining the California Association of Food Banks, I actually was the procurement lead for the Alameda County Community Food Bank in Oakland, California. And as we had mentioned earlier, right around the shelter-in-place time with COVID and all, that's when the prospect of working with small farms actually came to fruition for me as a procurement lead at a food bank. Small farms who had produce that they could no longer sell to businesses that were either closed or going out of business themselves needed a home. And so they approached the food bank for procuring their wares, which we gladly formed an agreement with, and soon came to realize that we wanted to take a stand in policy to procure from vendors that were more reflective of the ever-changing Alameda County. And so our food bank took a stand of investing close to $1 million to work with small farms. And it was here where I got exposure to, what these farmers were going through, et cetera, what it really meant to them to have hard sales, but also seeing from the client end the type of produce that was being brought in, which was quite different than the mix that food banks were getting. So right now, it's been a really game changer. I've learned about all the counties, getting a geographic lesson on the counties impacted. Shout out to Siskiyou and Tehama, places I didn't really was familiar with. But also, bringing the history of working with some previous aggregators before, like Saba Grocers, Fresno BIPOC, and even the Kitchen Table Advisors. And, I could speak volumes about what it has meant for food banks. I think the first one is, again, diversifying their variety of produce that's being brought in. Traditionally, food banks have been getting their produce from the California Association of Food Banks. We have a program that's called Farm to Family, which is built on procuring produce that used to be fallowed under. There's to the tune of over 350 million pounds that has been out there. And for pennies on a pound, food banks were getting that produce. However, that produce has been quote unquote limited to really core items and not culturally right items. So the inception of LFPA has allowed food banks to get more culturally right produce that is probably more appropriate to their neighbors in need standing in line. Secondly, it's kind of opened up the eyes about social consciousness, which was never there before. Some of the benefits that food banks have seen with the impact of LFPA is farmers now are getting fair market value for the items. They're not having to bid against big ag to sell. They're getting longer land leases. They're able to not have to secure loans. They're able to procure assets such as farm equipment. So, just hearing about those stories has really started a cultural change with procurement. Thirdly, it set the baseline for a collective purchasing project that we've done in the Bay Area. We've gotten the volume of three core commodities with five food banks here and approached the aggregator about what that would mean in terms of costs and benefit. And our first pilot proved, was great. We had 10% cost savings on three commodities. But more importantly, some of those benefits that I mentioned and how it really impacted the small farms were the stories that really drove what's leading now to a second implementation of this collective purchasing pilot. And at the end, better product quality is what we're seeing as this is first quality coming from the small farmers. One of the comments I got from uh, a food bank in Trinity was that the produce that they're seeing through LFPA has been better in quality and quantity than what they even see from their local retailers up there. So being able to reach these areas that have been classified traditionally as food deserts with great looking produce has all been very rewarding. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wilken. And I'll stop sharing a little bit to pass it over to Andy, who has this amazing tool that him and his team built that really showcases the interconnectedness of this network. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I will show that in 1 second. Yeah, I really want to lift up what Wilken just said. Back when we first created our first version of this in 2020, we really had three questions. How do we feed families with dignity? How do we support farmers? And three, how do we leave COVID with something more resilient? And I really think we answered all three of those, and we'll go over in this next section. The I think the moment the program really clicked for me was when I had my first piece of Frog Hollow produce, a peach. It was like the best peach I'd ever had. In that first season, we were delivering every week those peaches um, to young family or school-aged children who needed food support. And just knowing that that quality of produce is not something those families get to see that often. It is quite expensive. And knowing that that is the type of food that this program is supporting is really significant. And I think something that everyone should take home is that hunger relief can have dignity when the food is coming from the communities that it's feeding. Um, a little bit more about that second question. How are we supporting farmers? We didn't talk about this yet, but a little bit more about the model is, it's a huge pot of funding. CAFB, California Association of Food Banks, can't contract with 800 farms. That's just, that would cause nightmares forever. Um, So we invested this program into what's simply a hub and spoke model, where our contracted partners are primarily food hubs or organizations that behave like food hubs. They are the ones responsible for aggregating from their network of values-based growers. They aggregate it into either CSA style boxes or bulk, as Wilken mentioned, and then they deliver to food banks. So I'm gonna visualize for you all what that has looked like in California, or what that looks like in California, and we're gonna zoom out and then zoom back in on impact. Uh, so this is one of our partners in Southern California. You can see the dots are a little bit small, but essentially this is how it works. It's a network. In the middle, you have our food hub, who's anonymized here. Their red lines out are all of the farms they're sourcing from. The food is coming from very nearby. And then the yellow lines out are the food banks they're distributing to. This is just one network node. We have over 40 of these. So when you zoom out, you can see the reach of the program models or mimics where we know farmers to be in California. It really shows that the spread and the importance of this program. To my knowledge, on values-based procurement projects, there's no other one in the history of California that has procured as much from this kinds of farms as quickly. Besides maybe Market Match would be the most equivalent in scale and reach. And Market Match actually would have many more farmers. So shout out to that program if there's any Market Match people here. Um, but the in this amount of purchasing, over $60 million will be 80 by the end, happened in just 2 years. Um, and we have all of that impact data here as well. You can see which sort of farming communities were most super supported. Uh, and then the other note is we had the values we tracked as part of this project. So this is our overall impact numbers. Sorry if you have to maybe zoom in. Um, but we can also filter to what amount of our purchasing was certified organic, if my computer is going fast enough today. Um, 14 and a half, which is a significant portion, is certified organic. And we know that beyond what's actually certified organic, the growing practices were organic much beyond that. We also know our purchasing from socially disadvantaged growers was 46 million. I think that's close to 80%. So holding these values is really important to us, and accountability is really important to us. Um, but zooming back in, and I think you can hop back to the slides, Hector.
Sounds
It,
good.
we can look at all of those numbers at scale, and it can be, I don't know, meaningless to some degree. You're like, oh, millions, hundreds, pounds, you get lost a little bit. But every one of those dollars and every one of those farmers has had such an amazing, unique story to tell as part of this program. What looks like one statewide project is a story of hundreds of partners, and I don't even think we have a great estimate of how many families have been supported by this program, but I've got to imagine millions without exaggeration. And uh, the stories from our food hubs and the farms are just amazing. They are growing their businesses, they are hiring employees, they're buying new infrastructure. They have benefited from this program because it has been a reliable source of income, and that's something maybe we haven't hit as hard as we should have. When this program began, farmers knew, and food hubs knew it would last for months or years. And with that, that's what every farmer, and if there's farmers here, you want to be sure of a market because you can rely on it, and then you can build around it. So here is just some quotes from some of those partners. Was that all of what I was supposed to hit on this?
Yes, I think so. And I just before we continue, and I know a little bit of a tangent, and people that know me know that I go on tangents all the time. But I just want to piggyback on what Wilken and Andy said. At the core of this, we saw this amazing community impact, both at the farm and aggregator level, but also the people that were receiving the food. And we saw very creative approaches to the delivery of that food, right? I think that's part of what the CDFA pot of funding allowed us to see. So I just want to, one, again, shout out California Association of Food Banks. I mean, Wilkins team. I saw that Maria, also part of that team, is there watching this presentation for the Herculean effort that they did managing all of this information and tracking that work. Also, Andy's team for really focusing on the data aspects of making sure that we're gathering the correct information and that we're organizing the networks well. Uh, because that allowed us to see just this beautiful impact, right? People were able, as Wilken mentioned, to purchase infrastructure, to purchase infrastructure needed for their businesses. We had some examples of people that had a second job and could dedicate, thanks to this program, full time to farming, which is what they wanted. Uh, but other than that, we had amazing examples, as I mentioned, of creative approaches to food delivery. I want to shout out Savor the Local, who what they did is that they actually work with the city of Gonzales and and a health clinic to deliver food directly to the people. They would just drive and put the food boxes downtown and people would arrive, right? And those are the different approaches, community focused approaches to food justice that we tend not to see a lot because there's not a lot of vehicles to make them happen. So programs like these are the ones that actually allow for communities to be built. So anyway, just wanted to add that little piece there and really start talking. And by the way, another piece that I didn't mention, but what's next, right? So one of the pieces that it's worth uplifting about this program is that it also became a vehicle for supporting aggregators and farmers standardize and professionalize a lot of the practices, right? It had a low barrier of entry in comparison to other institutional sales channels. And that was by design, right? Because we understood that there are certain pieces that we needed to make relatively accessible so that we could target the populations that we wanted to work with. Now, that also had the benefit that it helped, for example, a lot of people that might not have electronic invoicing systems to actually develop them, or that might not have had a food safety plan to actually develop one. So it really helped for some aggregators and some farmers in the system to really take that extra step that now might transfer to farm to school sales, or that might transfer to accessing alternative grocery channels or marketing channels, right? So this is some of the unintended or collateral consequences of a program like this. And with that in mind, as I mentioned before, this program is set to end in the summer. So what will happen to the participants after this program ends? And what is happening at the policy level? For the participants, our teams are working to try to find alternative market channels. It is a reality right now that a program like this is going to leave a funding cliff after it, right? Because there wasn't or there isn't a market channel of this size with the same low barriers of entry and that the needs or the demand to really replace something like LFPA. At the same time, alternative market channels like institutional sales procurement, for example, farm to schools, are also getting defunded by the federal government, which means that even if they get state funded, the available funding is not going to be the same. So there is this work that we're doing right now, and also just huge shout out to all the aggregators that are looking for alternative market channels and really working hard to find a path forward. But there's this need to find market channels going forward. And that's where a lot of the work that is happening at the policy level is focused on. But before we go into the policy level, I just want to make space for Wilken to talk a little bit about what the food banks are doing.
Yeah, thanks, Hector. Yeah, so there's been over 100 agreements between aggregators and food banks that have happened through the life of LFPA. If anything, I wanted to try to change the culture a little and open the eyes of an alternative arm of procurement that food banks can have. After all, through this program, we've brought in a lot of different types of produce. Our count on produce has been over 150 count, and bringing in things like cherimoya, Nopales, Yukon, Korobi, things I wasn't really familiar with, but definitely serve people who really want those items, to try to take away some of the stigma of standing in line for food. At least if we can get them the food that is what they would normally get on their table for dinner, that's great. But realizing that a program like this may not come across again, really encouraging the food banks to see what they can do to kind of keep the relationships going. And I do have some examples outside of my old food bank who, graciously is still devoting a large amount of their procurement budget to continuing to work with small farms. Other food banks have taken the initiative to carve out some money themselves to keep the relationships going with the aggregator and small farms that they really enjoyed working with. There's a vehicle of state money that's called CAFF Food Funding, with the stipulation that that money has to be spent on California originated foods. That money can also be used to procure from small farms within the state. So hopefully, food banks will consider the benefits of what they got from LFPA and channel some of that. Hector spoke about other opportunities that food banks might have that might call for the need of these aggregators and small farms. I had a program out in Stockton that was requiring produce for medical type boxes, and one of our aggregators stepped in and filled the need there. We're also doing a study that was granted by Sutter Health on actually getting food for the farm workers of Punjabi and Latinx background. And an aggregator there is helping us with that program as well. So, slowly seeing some opportunities, but again, really hoping to keep these relationships going.
Thank you so much. And I'll pass it over to Andy for a little bit of the policy side of things.
I think Hector might open it for questions now because our
Sure.
policy brief, we're actually going to have a fun action item for everyone. It'll be very interactive. We'll really be civically engaged. But also just want to now open space for questions about the program, clarifications. If we have any farms together, vendors or farm impacted who want to shout out any impacts, welcome. Do we have any questions? I answered some in the chat, the Q&A, which I can just go over. Someone asked about the software we used to create the map. We custom built it. We are hoping over the long term to sort of uh, expand its accessibility, but for now it's just privately held within our organizations. And the data we're all tracking that you saw is just a requirement of it being a contracted grant program. Um, and a lot of money is moving out, and as it's just important to have strong fiscal controls, so we know where the money is moving to which farms. And someone asked about the logistics. Was the farmer sending the food or the organizations were picking up the food? What was really cool about this program is that the models were different everywhere. For those who work in food systems, it is just like by the seat of your pants, and things are, you know, put together in often grassroots ways. I will say the majority of programs and however exactly they worked looked like this: a food hub or aggregation site would buy from farms. Those farms would deliver it to a central location where the food hub and aggregator was then responsible for last mile distribution or getting it to the food banks. And then the food banks would get it to the community members and they all have their unique models. Where do I find your local aggregator? If I would say drop a line to us, and we can just connect you and hear a little bit more. Um, oh, we got a farm, Gideon, who's unexpected, got $10,000 of purchases from our farm. That's a significant amount for small farms. I don't know, Gideon, if you're comfortable coming off mic. I don't know if you're able to actually. Sorry. But thank you for that. Yeah, if there's any other farms who've been supported by this project, just put your name in the chat. Um, there's a question about funding beyond the summer. I'm going to go into that next. And then there's a question for Wilken. Wilken, can you speak more to how you structure and time your harvests with values-based procurement you conduct with small farmers? Curious to hear more about the trade-offs between contracting ahead of harvest versus during or after harvest.
Yeah, great question. Of course, when we rolled this out immediately, we wanted to get money into the hands of the farmers, so we utilized what they had available as the initial items for procurement. But part of the objectives of LFPA was also to have our distribution partner, in this case, food banks, really get to know their aggregator and form a relation where the ultimate dream is I could step out of the relationship. And in some instances where there was enough budget that would flow for a couple of years, some food banks have actually reached that part in the relationship where they could start requesting items knowing that they'd be, 3 or 4 months out in requesting items that they know that would have to start with seed and that would be harvested later. So they were able to start taking over the demand a little bit. I had mentioned that collective project that was called Boundless that involved the 5 food banks in volume. That was specifically to test how demand would be requested and what it would take to honor a significant volume based on that demand. And so that was one of the parameters we tested, and it worked fantastically. We got numbers in time for the particular aggregator to put seed in the ground and harvest probably 3 months later. And one of the things that the aggregator learned was the ability to build safety stock in the event that something went wrong with one of their sources, but also forecasting and getting their network of farms used to forecasting and growing to customer bases. So that is the ultimate to develop that relationship. And we had a lot of wins in that arena.
And I just want to piggyback from what Wilken said, specifically talk about two examples. One that happened during the pilot that Wilken mentioned initially, and one that happened during the LA fires, which is something that was just this amazing benefit of a network like this. And I'll make space also to Andy to talk a little bit more into the LA fires example. But really, so the pilot really kicked in when California went through some very impactful winter storms that led to a lot of flooding in on the Central Coast. It led to a lot of issues, and we saw examples. For example, I'm a very redundant person. Anyway, uh, in the North Coast of California, that were not only were they hit by the storms, but they were also hit by a tremor, right? So thanks to the pilot and thanks to the systems that we created through, well, that also the vendors, right? I don't want through Farms Together, we were able to support those farmers impacted by the floods by purchasing whatever product they had left after their farms got impacted by the storms, right? Giving them an avenue to actually recoup some of the losses without requiring loans, without requiring a lot of insurance payout. That sometimes is very difficult, especially as we know that a lot of the insurers have left California due to issues like this one. Similarly speaking, we had an example of some of the supply chains breaking in the North Coast of California, where one of the aggregators, Northwest Grower Association, was able to pick like a certain amount of the product that was not being able to deliver and actually deliver to the food banks because they were there, right? And we saw something similar with the LA fires. So just want a little bit of a fun fact here. I have a bit of a and we were just talking this before the presentation. I have a bit of a ecological background, and when we're looking at the networks of the farmers, aggregators, and food banks, it actually resembles a lot how the food chains work in nature, and that's why we've seen that those local networks are actually more resilient. And I'll just make space to Andy to talk a little about the LA fires example.
Um, I'll actually talk floods instead.
Okay.
But yeah, I want to lift up also before that a few notes in the chat, and I really want to drill into the impact on a zoomed in level here because I'm going to bury the lead. We're going to have an ask of everyone here later. Um, but and this first example comes from Delia, who's one of our great account managers. Like I said, there's so many moving parts in this project, hubs, farms, food banks. We really rely on a team of great folks who really hands-on with all the partners. And Delia has some examples from her network that she supports as a result of this program. Hoop houses were built on a strawberry farm. A tractor was purchased on a San Diego farm. A leased, the size of a lease was doubled in Santa Maria. And then lower down, Margaret from a farm as part of this program says this program allowed us to create relationships with multiple food banks in the region, which paved the way to build other institutional partnerships and now working with school districts. And that's just a really good example of how this program answered that third question I had, which is how do you build resiliency? Um, and that just comes with time. It comes with guaranteed markets. It comes from businesses who are using those sales to grow and expand. This is not a government payout. This is an investment. There's been studies nationally that have shown that $1 into this program, or actually $2 into local economies. And so that investment of 80 million or whatever it is in California is much greater than that in terms of impact, as well as in terms of the viability and resiliency and strength and growth potential of our small farms. We've shown in this program that we can match in scale industrial corporate food systems. We just need to be given the opportunity, and we can do it with the highest quality produce. Another example that Hector was saying is like we're using this to innovate. We're using it because we have some flexibility. So during some floods last year, or potential floods, um, we were tracking a storm system going through Sonoma County. We saw a few days out that some farms in flood zones were at risk of having their fields flooded. Because these networks were pre-existing and our systems were in place, we ran emergency harvests. We got farmers out doing harvest of those fields, got the produce aggregated, and then distributed to the food bank. We saw pictures the day of the storm, and those fields were flooded. Any other time in this state's history without this program, that food would have just gotten lost. That money would be gone. That food would not be getting to the table. There's just so many different stories here, and that's what I was
Yeah.
trying to say earlier. Um, and if there's nothing else or no other questions, or maybe there is.
Hector and Andy, you know what I think you guys could probably talk about more was the whole aggregator model and how some farms stepped up to the plate to become an aggregator.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's actually something that we saw across the board is that a lot of new aggregators started because of farms together, right? Which I mean, it goes a little bit to what we're talking of how this program helped to standardize and professionalize a lot of the networks that to a certain degree were already there informally, right? It's very common, and I won't let the farmer the farmers will correct me if I'm wrong, but it's very common that sometimes a farmer will talk to another farmer to see if they have like a product and then sell it and then try to sell that product, right? If they know somebody. Now, with this system, with this program, we actually saw that take a little bit more of a formal shape, right? Where a farmer would represent several ones. A great example that they were already in the process of creating their food hub was Brisa Ranch. And so Brisa Ranch really started selling a lot through this program. And then they were already working with KTA to create a food hub. And that kind of sped up the process. So we started seeing this across different examples. And just going back to the LA fires piece, and huge shout out to Delia Hitz, our account manager who's here in the presentation, who also worked with a community-based organization so that when people were impacted by the fires, we could actually redirect some of our funding to a small contract dedicated to organizations working with the people impacted by the fires. So people could actually, the community itself or the aggregators in the region could actually support those that lost their homes, that needed food. So that's just another example of how malleable and impactful this program can be when we focus on local supply chains. But should we go to the policy piece? Because I think we're almost out of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we go to 11, right?
Oh, we got to 11? Never mind then. Let's just make space.
Um, Great. Yeah. So we need to protect this program. If when it goes away, we're working with the assumption that it's going away, farms and food hubs will go out of business. I feel pretty sure of it. Um, but more than that, we know that this is an alternative way and a better way for our government to work. We know that there's so much terrible investment from the USDA in our food system, focusing on commodity crops, ruining the environment. We know that this program, in fact, is investing both in local economies and in a healthier environment. And so it's so important to our organizations to protect it and bring it back. And the only way it's going to, at the scale of what it is government, state, or federal investment. Philanthropy will not show up in this scale, and it's the scale that we really need to get. So I'm going to go as quickly through a primer of how the policy works, and then going to put an ask to everyone here to make phone calls during the session. And I'll share more about who we're going to ask you to call and why it's important. But the big pie in the sky goal is for this funding to end up in the federal government under what's called the Farm Bill, which I'm sure many of you are familiar, but if you're not, the Farm Bill is the giant spending package that funds all of the USDA. It's supposed to be every 5 years. And it's in there that we really see the permanence of this program. And because it's a national program, there's one in every state and many tribes. We know our mobile farmers market is beeping on its way out of the office. Hopefully you can't hear that. We know that the Farm Bill is where it needs to go. Um, like we said earlier, the USDA had been committed to this project through 2028. This administration canceled that. But we know there is positive momentum for bipartisanly supported funding packages for this project, which is really hopeful. Like Hector shared, that we were able to unfreeze the funding within 1 week because of thousands of calls from around the country to the USDA. We know that this is a really popular project. It makes a lot of sense in every district in the country, whether it's red or blue. So because of that, we are long-term hopeful that it will come back, but it's not going to happen anytime soon because of the mess that is what's happening in DC. And I don't need to go more about that, except to know that there's not going to be any farm bill anytime soon. It's not going to come in time for us to save the funding cliff that's going to happen in June. Which means, next slide, we need to go to our state budget and request bridge funding while we push nationally to bring the funding back. And that's where we are now. With CAFF and CAFB and ourselves, we are running an advocacy campaign to have our state government appropriate funds for this project for the next 3 years while we work to bring it back. We are asking for $45 million to run for 3 years, which will be less than we're running at now, but we'll keep the project afloat. And what that looks like in the state government is essentially over the first 6 months of the year, there's back and forth between the governor's office and the assembly and the Senate um, to put together a budget. In January, the governor released his budget, did not have this project in it. We now have to make sure that our state senators and state assembly people are including it in their budget. And this is a fight. And it's especially a fight because this is a deficit year. I don't know, maybe the third in a row. And it's a big deficit. And that means no one wants to put any extra money into the state budget that hadn't been there before. Um, but we know that this project is so crucial for our rural economies, for our families who are losing SNAP benefits, who are losing Medicaid benefits, We know that farmers are so committed to this project. We just know that it's one of the strongest types of programs that our government can do. And so we believe that we can push our Assembly and Senate, state Senate, uh, into action. And that is where it comes to you all, because we know that your voices matter. In fact, it really pushes the needle forward. Uh, your assembly people and senators will listen. And truthfully, not when you write emails, only when you make phone calls, but they hear it and they hear it over and over again. And then they talk to their colleagues about it. And when in their committees and background office meetings, they hear from you all that you care about this project, then they lend their support. They say this $45 million is absolutely worth it. And it can feel really deflating, our politics, that no one's listening, but it's not true, always. And that's what we saw in that freeze. It was 1 week turnaround time that through phone calls, they released the funding during that freeze. That was through phone calls over and over again, telling people. So we actually are going to do an interactive moment where we're going to ask those in this room to call right now. You are already on mute, so you won't be interrupting anything, and to uh, speak this prompt to the office. And it can be a little maybe scary if you've never done it before. Someone might pick up the phone, you might have to talk to them, but we were trying to make it as simple as possible. And so we put a call script here on the screen, and in the chat, I am gonna put directions on how to find out how to reach your. We're gonna focus on state senators, and I'm gonna ask that you call and do this with us together. Um, and so, one before I do that, any Q&As, because I'm also gonna gather if people make phone calls to just drop it in the chat for us. Any questions before I give the next bit of instruction? I don't think people can come off mute, so you might just have to use I don't know how that works. Hopefully I explained that well. Yes, I will. That's a great question. I can copy the uh, into the chat. Okay, so first things first is I am putting a link to find your representative. You just put in your address. It's only important for you to call the representative that you actually live in or work in. And then second link, today we're just please put in your address. And then the second it'll say who your assembly person and who your senator is, your state senator. We are Great questions. We're only calling senator offices, so don't worry about assembly. Senate is what we're focusing on. And in that second link, there's the list. The first link will show you who your senator is, and then the second link will direct you to the office to call. And it is better to call the Capitol office, the Sacramento number. And once you find both of those things, we're going to ask you to just dial that number and say this script. And if you happen to be part of this program, a farmer or food hub, you can share a little bit more about how this program actually impacted you. Um, uh, and that's it. And if you're making these phone calls, we're just going to stay on the line while we do it. Please just drop it in the chat that you called and what district you called, because we actually need to capture. Um, oh wait, there's questions that you can't see the links. I'm putting them in the chat. The first link is there, find your representative. And then the second link is, are people seeing that? Uh, Good question. Oh, yes, you're right. Thank you all. The second link. Okay, here they are. Yes. So there's the find your rep link and then the list And as you make a phone call, we're just going to stay online for folks who are doing it to just please just jot it in the chat, the senator you called, and we capture that. And we actually have our team in Sacramento today dropping in on offices. So when you make those phone calls, we drop into their office and say, "Hey, we know you got a phone call today." Okay. Yes, we'll try to figure out the script.
So for some reason, I hope you can paste it handy, but for me, Zoom didn't let me, so I don't know if we need to create like a separate like uh, Google Doc for folks to just see it.
I just
Oh,
had to
you did.
I just had to split it into two. It was too big.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yes, and yeah, feel free to mute me as you make your phone calls. Actually, I didn't really have anything more to say anyway. Any questions? Okay. This is democracy in action.
Yeah, I bet most people didn't expect that from their small farm conference presentation.
For good measure, I'm putting in the chat a link to our newsletter to get monthly updates about this, um, about Farms Together, but also this campaign. Um, we should know whether this gets committed by May. Thank you, Evan. I'm going to send the script out after the webinar.
And I also encourage folks to subscribe to like CAFF's newsletter, where you will also be getting updates on all things policy and small farms that CAFF is doing at the moment.
Um, what else do I have to say about this? Oh, all right, got Ashby's office. Um, called Senator Becker's. Great, great. We'll capture this. If anyone's interested, we can play a quick because we have a little time. It's great. Thank you, everybody. Um, if anyone's curious about the impact in your district or county, just shout out a county and I can do quick like call and response about how many farms were impacted in your county. Um, hopefully someone writes a county where there's actually a lot of impact. Sacramento County, great, great one. Let's see. Um, in Sacramento County, it was about 10 different farms were supported. And the food bank, a lot of the food got to the food bank there. So a lot of the food was coming um, into that district. This is amazing, everybody. Wow. Um, let's try. Okay, Sonoma County. Our friends at Feed Sonoma are there, so that's a good one. Um, Sonoma County is 50 farms over $1 million into Sonoma County. It's great. That was Sonoma, so I just shared that one. 50 farms. Feed Sonoma is a great partner there. Let's see. Fresno, good one, Keely. Let's see. Fresno, 64 farms, almost $3 million. Um, oh man. Yes, San Diego, great. They got like $7 million in San Diego County and maybe like 80 farms. Shout out Food Shed. And Dickinson Farms are great partners down there. Um, yes, it's okay to stumble in your script. They hear you. They're used to it. Um, Thank you everyone so much for doing these phone calls. It's really impressive, but it matters. Um, any other thing, Hector, Wilken, any last questions? I'm gonna report all this back to our team. Also gonna put our emails in the chat. Maybe Hector and Wilken, you can as well. We love follow-up
Yeah,
questions. Oh, they're there.
of
Uh,
course. And
Thank you for those spreading the word. Please join our newsletter. I'll post that again. We're gonna have calls to action in the coming weeks. If any
mhm.
farms are here that are part of this program, we're gonna be needing farms up in Sacramento in April. So drop us a line. I know there was a couple that said you were here. So well, we need people up there is another thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't
And
know.
I just want to appreciate everybody that just did the calls, everybody that attended this presentation, also our amazing teams at the California Association of Food Banks, at Fresh Approach, at CAFF, our account managers, but especially the food banks, aggregators, and farms that participate in this program and community-based organizations. They're really the ones that did the work, the hard part of the work. So yeah, this wouldn't be possible without their willingness to collaborate, their willingness to talk to each other and create those relationships, to change their systems when needed, and really to meet each other where they're at, which is huge, which is one of the most difficult things when trying to facilitate a sale, right? Which our team should know.
Yeah, I also want to say when we first started this program, our baseline was trying to reach like 500 farmers. And the fact
Yeah,
that we reached over 800 is astronomical. The thing I'm really proud of with my team here is that we've been able to pay the farmers within 10 to 12 days on average, which I
that's
know is
insane.
essential for them.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, I remember the first time it hit, like the amount of money that was moving. And it just was just this insane number to really comprehend, right? $500,000 each week.
Yeah, thank you everyone. I'm just jotting down all of these phone calls you made and giving it to our policy team so that they can follow up. That's just so good. I think we got almost 10. Um, Great. Yeah, so I think that's it.
Yeah.
How productive.
And I don't know, Evan, if there's like any capacity to let people unmute or anything. I don't know if folks, if you want to say anything. Yeah,
Was there somebody in particular you want me to unmute?
no, just really give space for folks to say something if they want to.
Um,
A lot of great
Thank you,
comments here in
everyone.
the chat here. People taking action. I believe this is the first time Small Farm Conference has been a venue for direct democracy. So appreciate this, everybody, being a part of this. We're not just hanging out on webinars. We are making a difference, causing an impact in the world. And
Yes, thank you all. Thank you so much. Join our newsletter.
all right. Well, it sounds like we're getting lots of great response here. Folks making those calls. We will follow up with everybody with an email for those of you who registered with additional information. We'll make sure all the links are included, as well as the script if you didn't get a chance to call your representative. And anything else, fellas, before we call it a day?
That's
Just a lot of
it.
appreciation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, McGuire got a lot of calls. Good. We'll drop in. Thank you.
All right, then. Well, thank you to the three of you. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today's workshop, and we hope to see you at the next workshop here at the California Small Farm Conference.